In early May 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington was bracing for her fiercest battle yet. The Japanese Navy's powerful carrier force was closing in, and the Coral Sea would soon erupt in a furious duel of carrier aircraft. By the afternoon of May 8th, Lexington was heavily damaged, her decks ablaze and listing dangerously. With fires out of control and explosions tearing through her hull, the order finally came to abandon ship. Her crew, resolute to the end, gathered on her scarred decks as the sun set, leaving their proud carrier to slip beneath the waves. Explore Lexington's reclassification, her early missions across the Pacific, the fateful battle that sealed her fate, and her enduring legacy in carrier warfare. USS Lexington was first authorized in 1916 as a Lexington-class battlecruiser CC-1. She was laid down on January 8, 1921, at Fall River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. The Washington Naval Treaty, established in 1922, halted the ship's original construction as a battlecruiser, so her hull was redesigned and she was reclassified as a carrier on July 1, 1922. Launched in October 1925 and commissioned on December 14, 1927, she became one of the US Navy's first true fleet carriers. Her hull retained the armored belt and much of the planned protection of a battlecruiser, roughly 5 to 7 inches of belt armor and up to 2 inches of deck armor, with armored bulkheads and gun turret of similar thickness. Measuring about 888 feet in length and 107 feet in beam, Lexington displaced roughly 47,000 tons at full load. Powering her were 16 Yarrow boilers feeding 4 turboelectric drives, together achieving 180,000 shaft horsepower, allowing her to achieve speeds of 33 knots. In her original configuration, Lexington carried a powerful gun inherited from her battlecruiser design. 4 twin-mount 8-inch 203mm guns stood on the starboard side of the flight deck, 2 forward and 2 aft. These battery guns were intended for surface action, though firing them risked damage to the flight deck. Her secondary armament consisted of a dozen 5-inch 127mm dual-purpose guns arrayed along the hull sides. By the start of 1942, just months before Coral Sea, Lexington had shed her heavy guns altogether. Her 4 8-inch twin turrets had been removed, later repurposed as coastal batteries on Oahu, and replaced by new anti-aircraft mountings. These included 17 5-inch guns in single mounts along the deck, 12 quad 1.1-inch 28mm gun mounts, and 22 20mm Oerlikon cannons. This transformation turned her once heavier armament into a formidable barrage against aircraft at the expense of surface gun firepower. As for her aircraft, she was designed to comfortably accommodate 78 aircraft. By 1942, her carrier complement at Coral Sea consisted of Grumman F-4F Wildcats, Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and Douglas TBD Devastators. In practice, she was a fast, powerfully armored carrier with a large flight deck and potent, if aging, defenses, a formidable centerpiece of the Pacific Fleet heading into 1942. When the Pacific War began at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Lexington was already at sea on a mission to reinforce outlying bases. She had been steaming back toward Hawaii, ferrying fighter squadrons westward for Midway, when news of the Japanese attack on Oahu arrived. Her dive bombers and fighters were launched on alert, but no enemy planes appeared. In the tense hours that followed, Lexington remained at sea, running patrols off Johnston Island and Honolulu. Fuel shortages forced her to return to Pearl by December 13th. Lexington's first significant engagement came in March 1942. Intelligence indicated Japanese ships gathered at Lae and Salamaua on New Guinea's northeast coast. On March 10th, at dawn, Lexington launched a powerful strike, attacking the Japanese troopships and transports in the harbour of Lae. They sank at least 3 transports and damaged others before Yorktown's aircraft joined 15 minutes later. Lexington's losses were light. 1 Dauntless was shot down by anti-air fire, but not before its pilot downed an enemy floatplane in return. weather closed in, ending the raid without major damage to Lexington. By the afternoon, the carrier group retired. Lexington returned to Pearl Harbor by March 26th. Mid-April saw Lexington at sea again. On April 18th, American codebreakers had cracked Japan's intention for an invasion of Port Moresby, known commonly as Operation Mo, was set for early May. Lexington now carried roughly 21 Wildcat fighters, 37 Dauntless dive bombers, and 12 Devastator torpedo planes in its squadrons. Together with Yorktown, she steamed up along the Queensland coast toward the Coral Sea. The combined US force began meeting Japanese scout planes on May 2nd to 3rd as the two carrier groups converged. On May 7th, Lexington's air group finally struck its first carrier target. A search plane reported a Japanese light carrier, the Shoho, that was escorting the invasion convoy to Port Moresby. Lexington and Yorktown both launched strikes in the late morning. Lexington's dive bombers and torpedo planes hit Shoho repeatedly. In rapid succession, she took at least 7 hits. Bombs caused fuel fires on deck and hangar, and torpedoes wrecked her engineering. Lexington had helped destroy Japan's first carrier loss of the war. Meanwhile, Shokaku and Zuikaku, forewarned by reconnaissance, were preparing their own devastating strikes. May 8, 1942, dawned over the Coral Sea. Lexington and Yorktown knew the Japanese carriers were near. The battle that morning would be the first between opposing carrier forces. Both fleets spotted each other at about 9 a.m. and launched strikes within minutes. Lexington's planes took off roughly at 9:07 a.m., 7 minutes after Yorktown's. The Americans headed northeast to where Japanese carriers were reported. In the morning air skirmishes, Yorktown's dive bombers hit Shokaku's flight deck with bombs, leaving her unable to launch aircraft. Lexington's planes joined this attack, scoring 1 bomb hit on Shokaku. By 11:05 a.m., the US carriers had returned from that strike, and the Japanese carriers launched their counterattack. They sent out 2 waves of aircraft, consisting of roughly 50 aircraft targeting Lexington. At 11:20 a.m., the torpedo planes found their mark. The first torpedo hit forward, jamming the aircraft elevator at the bow and cracking a fuel tank, causing minor leaks. The second struck amidships, rupturing Lexington's main port water lines and flooding 3 boiler rooms. These explosions shut down half her engines and pitched the carrier a heavy 6 to 7 degree list to port. Lexington slowed to 24 knots and began counter-flooding starboard tanks to correct her list. Barely minutes later, at about 11:30 a.m., more dive bombers struck the stricken carrier. Japanese aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku dove in. 1 bomb slammed into the ready ammunition locker of a forward 5-inch gun mount, detonating it and killing that gun's crew. Another bomb found its way into the ship's funnel, killing dozens of gun crews nearby. Shrapnel from near misses punctured the hull, flooding 2 more compartments. The ship's list began to right itself as fuel and water were shifted. However, disaster struck from within. At 12:47 p.m., a massive internal explosion ripped through Lexington. The sparks in the funnel had ignited gasoline vapors pooled in damaged tanks and lines. A huge blowout shattered parts of the flight deck and sent men flying off their feet. Fires spread rapidly from the hangar up through the deck. But remarkably, flight deck operations continued. Over the next hour, Lexington's crews resumed launch and recovery. 6 returning Wildcats and Dauntlesses, still airborne that afternoon, made it to deck, and all surviving planes were landed or ditched by 2:14 p.m. At 2:42, another catastrophic explosion tore through Lexington. This blast, originating in the burning hangar, hurled the forward elevator many feet above the deck and severed the ship's remaining internal lines of communication and power. The forward half of the ship went dark. Firefighting crews on board fought to contain flames with dwindling resources, but the oil-fed inferno was spreading. By this time, both the forward and aft engine rooms had been evacuated. There was no way to pump out or contain the fires. Finally, at 5:07 p.m., the order was given to abandon ship. Life rafts and nets went over the side. Wounded men were transferred to destroyers on scene. A series of smaller blasts tore through the burning carrier between 6 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. as ammunition cooked off. Remarkably, Lexington lost only 216 men. The rest, over 2,700 sailors and airmen, were rescued by the escorting destroyers, including USS Phelps and others. Shortly after Lexington was abandoned, her fate was sealed. At 7:15 p.m., the destroyer USS Phelps was ordered to sink the hulk to prevent her from being captured or drifting hazardously. Phelps fired 5 torpedoes into the drifting carrier. At 7:52, 12 hours after the first attack in mid-morning, USS Lexington finally slid under the waves. By midnight on May 8th, the Coral Sea was littered with debris but quiet again. Both sides had paid a high price in ships and lives. For the US Navy, Lexington's loss was sobering. She had been America's first carrier sunk in war, with 216 officers and men dead and dozens of aircraft destroyed. The loss taught the Navy grim but invaluable lessons about damage control, fuel handling, and the ferocity of modern carrier combat. Strategically, Coral Sea was initially a mixed outcome. The US carriers lost Lexington, and Yorktown was damaged, but the Japanese paid too. The Imperial Navy's light carrier Shoho had been sunk by Lexington and Yorktown together on May 7th, and on May 8th, Yorktown's planes badly battered Shokaku, putting her out of action for months. Zuikaku also lost most of her veteran aircrews in the battle, and was out of action while her aircrews were replenished and trained. Crucially, Japan's invasion fleet for Port Moresby was turned back. By nightfall on May 8th, the Imperial plan for Operation Mo was suspended, and Japanese forces were forced to withdraw instead of landing in New Guinea. In effect, Lexington's sacrifice, together with Yorktown's resistance, thwarted the Japanese advance toward Australia. In the battles to come, Coral Sea proved a strategic victory for the Allies, and helped influence the Battle of Midway as crucial carriers like Shoho, and more importantly, fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku were absent thanks to damage and heavy losses. For the US Navy, the namesake of Lexington would live on. Just weeks after the battle, the Navy decided to honor the sunken carrier. An Essex-class carrier under construction, originally named USS Cabot CV-16, was renamed Lexington on June 16, 1942. This new Lexington, an entirely different ship, carried forward the legacy of her namesake into the rest of World War II. The story of CV-2 ended in the Coral Sea's waters, but her name and lessons survived.